Tonight, show me how to love you. The trembling words slipped from the lips of a 25-year-old man who had just laid his father to rest on the northern hill, now holding tight to the black woman 10 years his elder. The arms of a young white man, not yet fully grown but burning with a fierce heart, wrapped around her, pleading to be guided. Silas's hand shook as it reached for Mariah's, hesitating as though afraid she might pull away. But this time she did not withdraw. She let the warmth flow between them. Outside, lightning split the sky, casting their shadows sharp upon the wooden wall. Could a man still untested, and a widow once judged by the world, find the courage to begin a love that defied every boundary? Evening in Wyoming carried the red bronze light of a dying sun. Dry wind swept the scent of gray grass and damp earth after a long day. Above, heavy clouds gathered into dark masses, promising rain. From the shadow stretching down from the distant mountains, a lone figure stood at the old wooden door of the Keaton Ranch. That figure was Mariah Ellis, a black woman of about 35, small in frame but firm in bearing, her dark cloak covered in the dust of many roads. She knocked 3 times, slow and steady, as though each strike had passed through years of hesitation before daring to reach this threshold. Inside, Silas Keaton stepped out from the empty kitchen, boots still caked with dirt. He was 25, his face thin, sun-darkened, eyes hollow with sleepless nights. That morning he had laid his father in the ground on the northern hill above the ranch. A fresh mound of red soil marked the grave, as heavy as the burden that had now fallen on his shoulders. 800 acres of land, cattle, debt to the bank, and the town's sharp-eyed gossip, all of it pressed down before he could catch his breath. He opened the door and saw her. In the dusk, Mariah's eyes glinted like dark glass, weariness mixed with guarded watchfulness. "Good evening." Her voice was husky, low. "I only ask for a corner of your barn, 5 nights at most. I can pay in work, cooking, sewing, whatever you need." Silas froze, hand still gripping the frame. In his mind echoed the town's whisperings. A black widow, no husband, no child, wandering alone. Folks called her a woman of no worth. If he let her in, by morning they'd be saying young Keaton had lost his sense, that the ranch had lost its standing. His eyes slid to the table where his father's chair still sat empty. Out of memory rose the man's words. "A man is measured by his mercy, not his acres. You can lose much, but if you lose your kindness, you've lost everything." Silas drew a slow breath and gave a small nod. "There's dry hay in the barn. You can stay. I'll bring blankets." Mariah's eyes flickered, as though she could hardly believe a white man, fresh from burying his father, would still open his door. "Thank you," she whispered, bowing her head slightly. Silas led her around back, unlatched the worn barn door. Inside, the air was thick with hay, horse sweat, and old wood. She spread her cloak on the straw, practiced in the habit of one who had known too many nights on the road. "Rest. I'll fetch the blankets," he said again, turning away. But when lightning cracked across the sky, he caught her face for an instant. Lines drawn with fatigue, shoulders trembling with cold, yet her eyes carried no plea. They were the eyes of one who had stood alone far too long. Back in the house, Silas pulled out 2 old wool blankets. His hands hesitated mid-motion. He recalled the sneer of Harlan Graves, the powerful rancher who had leaned close at the graveside that morning. "5 nights, boy, and this land will be mine." An omen now echoed by the stranger's very request for 5 nights' shelter. Still, he carried the blankets to the barn. Mariah had already curled into the hay, shivering against the chill. When he set the blankets down, she lifted her face into the glow of the small oil lamp. "You are kinder than most I've met," she murmured. Silas gave no answer, only a nod, and drew the door closed behind him. Night fell. Rain hammered the tin roof, wind whistled through the cracks in the wood. In his room, Silas lay on the wooden bed, eyes wide open. He thought of the cold rain striking the barn, of the woman inside. Was she sleeping or trembling still? The thought gnawed at him, turning him restless, keeping sleep far from reach. Through the roar of storm, his father's face rose again in memory, solid, upright, never leaving a soul to fall at his door. Compared to him, Silas felt too young, too thin, shoulders too narrow to bear it all. Yet at least this night, he had done one thing right. He had not left another soul out in the storm. At dawn, when the prairie still lay in faint gray light, and the wind whistled softly through the window, Silas Keaton lay with his back to the morning. The smell of coal smoke from last night's fire had mixed with something else, coffee, and the rich scent of fresh bread. He startled awake, pulled on his dust-stained boots, and struck them against the floorboards. In the kitchen he found Mariah Ellis standing at the old wooden table, a cloth tied around her waist, turning a cast-iron pot with steady hands. Her coiled hair was bound back, though a few curls fell loose against her neck. Sunlight cut through the window, touching the deep warmth of her dark skin. Mariah looked up, hesitant. "Forgive me. I stepped into the kitchen without asking. I thought I owed you at least one breakfast. I wanted to repay your kindness somehow." Silas stood still a moment, something easing inside him at those words. He gave a short nod and sat at the table. The scent of coffee spread thick and warm, the first he had tasted since his mother passed. They ate across from one another. He, 25, eyes heavy with loss. She, 35, her maturity clear in each line of her face. At first their talk was little more than courtesy. Then Mariah spoke of herself. Born in Kansas, widowed many years, her path on the road never gentle. Her voice was steady, stripped of self-pity, as though pain had long been pressed beneath the dust she carried. Silas listened, answering now and then in brief words, often staring into the steam rising from his bowl. Inside him grew a feeling both strange and familiar, the weight of sharing a table, hearing another voice, another breath beside his own. That day, Mariah moved steadily about the house. She washed the heap of clothes long neglected and strung them on a line in the yard. Soap, sun, and prairie wind together left a clean, rare scent in the air. Passing by, Silas slowed when he caught sight of her bent to wring out the water, hands strong yet marked still with grace. By evening the clouds thickened, winds sharpened. Mariah hurried to the yard to gather the damp clothes. Rain broke sudden, hard as hammers. She clutched the laundry, slipped on the slick ground, her body pitching forward. From the porch, Silas sprang, catching her before she fell. His arm wrapped her shoulders, pulling her upright. For a breath, they stood close, their warmth mixing with the smell of rain and soaked cloth. The bundle dropped from her arms into the mud, forgotten. Her dark eyes met his, storm blue against shadowed brown. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled, and there, for an instant, was their first unguarded closeness. Mariah stepped back quickly, flustered yet grateful. Silas only nodded and stooped to lift the sodden clothes. Still, his chest hammered louder than the rain on the roof. That night the storm did not break. Wind howled, the tin roof groaned, thunder shook the beams. Silas paced the living room, mind caught on the memory of her stumble, his arm around her, the heat between them. The feeling inside him had no easy name, part duty of a host, part stirring he could not deny. He looked out toward the barn, rain blurring the night. The thought of Mariah huddled in hay, cold and damp, needled him. He turned back and knocked softly at the parlor door, where she had laid her few things. "You don't need to sleep in the barn tonight. Not with weather like this. The sofa in here is long enough. Take it." Mariah studied him, eyes flickering with doubt, then nodded. She spread a thin blanket across the couch, curled herself there. The house, once silent, now held the rhythm of her steady breath, and for the first time it felt less hollow. Silas returned to his room, yet sleep would not come. He turned from side to side, hearing rain on the roof, thunder down the valley, and the memory of the afternoon pressing hard. His arms around her, her warmth against him, it rose again and again. One part of him tried to set it aside as mere duty, but another, stronger, would not stop reminding him. It had been a long time since his heart had stirred at all. The second night passed, marked by thunder and the restless sighs of a man lying awake. That morning, thin clouds drifted across the sky, the wind still carrying the chill of last night's storm. Silas Keaton hitched his horse to the wagon, then glanced at Mariah Ellis, who was wrapping a scarf around her head and pulling her dark cloak close. "Ride down to town with me," he said. "We need salt, flour, and nails for the fence." Mariah hesitated, then gave a nod. Since her husband's death, she had grown used to the stairs, though they never grew easier. The road stretched long, wet grass bending under the wheels as they creaked, the horses' hooves striking a steady beat. Silas glanced at the woman beside him now and then, her back straight, eyes fixed far ahead, the look of one long accustomed to walking alone. Yet her hand clutched her cloak tight, betraying the strain inside her. When they reached the main street, life in town swelled around them, hammering from the smithy, children laughing, the smell of bread mingling with coal smoke. But the moment Mariah stepped down, every eye turned. Whispers rippled from the saloon porch and the storefronts. "That widow. They say she wandered all the way from Kansas. Women like that are never clean. Keaton just buried his father, and now he brings scandal into his house." Mariah lowered her head, quickened her steps, the scarf pulled nearly to cover half her face. Silas heard every word, blood burning in his ears. He bit down hard, ready to bark back, but then saw Mariah draw her shoulders in, swallowing each insult in silence. A middle-aged woman stepped from the store, voice sharp as vinegar. "Keaton, you just inherited the ranch. Don't let yourself be taken in. A woman like that only know how to cling." Silas stopped cold, heart tightening. He caught the faint tremor of Mariah's hand before she hid it in her sleeve. Without thought, he strode forward and seized her hand in his. His grip was firm, unyielding, as if to say, "Do not fear, I am here." Mariah stiffened, lifted her gaze. Amid the staring faces, she found his eyes, direct, unwavering. Just a clasp of hands, yet the trembling inside her eased. She pulled back quickly, flustered, but not before a flash of light showed in her eyes, the rare comfort of being defended. Silas said nothing, only drew a step closer, as though his silence itself could shield her. When the wagon rolled out of town, the wind carried off the sneers behind them. Mariah kept her lips tight, her face closed. Silas wanted to speak, but held his tongue. He only gripped the reins harder, eyes on the trail home, though his other hand remembered well the feel of hers. By late afternoon, the sky cleared. In the kitchen, Mariah busied herself with supper. The smell of flour, lard, and a touch of honey filled the cabin, stirring faint memories of his mother's kitchen. Silas stood on the porch, listening to the rhythm of her knife on the board, feeling something inside him settle. Mariah reached for a sack of flour on the high shelf, stretching on her toes, dress pulling tight, fingers still an inch too short. Silas stepped in, silent, came up behind her. His arm lifted easily to take it down. For an instant, his hand brushed hers. His chest hovered close to her back, breath mingling with the scents of pine wood and flower dust. Mariah froze, heart racing, the moment thick as storm air. He set the sack on the table, his voice low. "I'll get it." She turned, their eyes locking, and stepped back in haste. Yet in that fleeting glance, warmth crept in, like a soft wind breaking through storm season. That evening they sat across from each other in the small kitchen. Outside, wind whistled through the cracks, but the lamp glowed steady within. Mariah ladled soup into bowls, her manner calm, though Silas noticed her lips pressed tighter than before. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the face worn by the road, yet softened still with quiet grace. "Don't let their talk weigh on you," he said, voice low but firm. "They don't know you." They only judge. Mariah laid her spoon down. Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. She held his gaze a long moment, then gave a small nod. The sorrow had not lifted, but something new stirred there. A spark of trust, fragile and fresh. Silas lowered his head to his bowl, feigning focus, though his heart pounded. From that clasp in town to the brush of hands in the kitchen, he knew something had shifted. He did not know if he was ready for it, but neither did he wish to put it out. The third night settled over the ranch, leaving in its wooden walls something no longer simple kindness, but the first green shoot of a feeling without a name. The morning lay quiet after the market day filled with whispers. Pale gold sunlight stretched across the prairie, soft as honey, lighting each drop of dew clinging to the grass. Mariah Ellis sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen, turning a tin cup slowly in her hands, eyes fixed far beyond the window. Silas Keaton stepped in, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the scent of fresh-cut wood still on him from the stables. He stopped when he saw her face, eyes staring past the room, heavy with something she had long kept shut away. "Is there something you want to tell me?" His voice was low, uncertain. Mariah turned, lips trembling. After a pause, she drew a deep breath, gathering courage. "After my husband died, grief wasn't the only thing that came for me. There were men who thought a widow was easy prey." Silas's hand closed into a fist, his chest tightening. Her voice grew rougher. "One night, not long after, a man forced his way in. He meant to take what he wanted. I fought with all I had, clawed, kicked, and I broke free. I ran into the night. Since then, I've drifted from place to place, never once daring to stay long enough for anyone to know who I truly am." The kitchen fell into a silence so deep he could hear the wind sweep the yard outside. Silas sat down across from her, eyes dark. He felt as though her pain had lodged inside his chest. This woman, so fierce in bearing, so proud in gaze, had lived years in fear and loneliness. He wanted words, but none came. Only his hand gripped the table edge hard, veins rising on his knuckles. Mariah gave a bitter smile. You see, they're right when they call me no longer clean, but I am still breathing, still standing, because I refused to fall. Silas shook his head, eyes burning with a mix of sorrow and rage. Don't say that. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Shame belongs only to the man who made you afraid. He stopped, swallowing the rest. Mariah looked at him, her eyes wet, but a glimmer of gratitude shone there. For a moment, no words were needed. Their gaze carried all that silence could hold. By afternoon, the weather turned. Black clouds rolled down from the mountains, wind howling through the birch trees. Silas shuttered the windows, stoked the fire high. Night fell in a storm of thunder, lightning, and rain, lashing the roof like a whip. In the parlor, Mariah curled on the sofa, clutching a blanket. Each thunderclap jolted her shoulders. The past surged back, splintering doors, the roar of a man's voice, the weight of his shadow. She trembled, eyes squeezed shut, breath coming fast. Silas heard the noise and rushed from his room. He found her huddled, wide-eyed with terror. He dropped to his knees beside her, laying a hand on her shoulder. Mariah, it's me. Just the storm. She looked at him, lips trembling, eyes pleading for something words could not carry. You don't need to face this alone, Silas said, voice firm though, gentle. Come to my room. The bed's big enough. At least, you won't have to fear alone. Mariah hesitated, then nodded. He guided her down the hall, lit another lamp. They lay on the wide wooden bed, space between them at first. But the thunder rolled harder, lightning cracked nearer, and she could not keep the distance. In the flash, her face showed clear, eyes glistening, jaw tight with strain. Suddenly her hand lifted, trembling but steady, brushing against his cheek. Her voice broke into a whisper. Please, hold me. Silas's heart clenched. Without thinking, he pulled her close, arms closing firm around her. Mariah pressed her face into his chest, the scent of pine and sweat wrapping her in a safety she had not known in years. In that moment, something burst inside him. It was no longer duty, no longer simple kindness. It was the fierce urge to keep, to shield, to erase the pain etched in her memory. Yet with it came fear, the gulf of 10 years between them, the weight of society's eyes, the whispers that would follow. Could he stand against it all? Outside, thunder split the sky, but within that embrace was a silence rare and deep, the calm of two storm-broken souls finding rest at last. The fourth night passed without further words. Only breath mingled in the dark, and an embrace that burned steady as fire against the endless storm. On the prairie, rumor moved like wind. Once it rose, nothing could stop it. It slipped from the saloon at the street corner, drifted past the row of shops, and carried all the way to the church porch come Sunday morning. The whispers bore both pity and scorn. The young master took a widow into his house. Barely laid his father to rest, and already he's let a woman lead him by the nose. Won't be long before the Keaton Ranch changes hands. Each time Silas Keaton came to town for salt, nails, or to sell a few thin cattle, he heard them. Mocking glances cut his way, low chuckles behind his back, half-true advice tossed like stones. He kept his face calm, but fire smoldered in his chest. One day, on the main dirt road, old Harris, the farmer who had worked the land beside the ranch for years, blocked his path. He clapped a hand on Silas's shoulder, the grip heavy as rock, his voice flat and certain. "Take my word, Silas. Send her off. You're young, you've got a ranch to hold. Don't let a woman of no name drag you down in the mud. The Keaton name is worth more than this." Silas pressed his lips tight, gave a nod to pass, but the words stuck in his mind like a thorn. He knew if his father were alive, the old man would never leave a soul cast aside at the door. His father had always said, "A man is measured by mercy, not by silver in his pouch." Inside the house, Mariah Ellis heard the voices too. Folks hardly bothered to hide their stares when she walked beside Silas through town, or even when she paused before the flower shop door. She had lived too long not to know. Such talk was no passing breeze. It could break a young man still unsteady, could set a tender ranch to trembling. One autumn evening the wind rose again. The cottonwood behind the house bent in the gusts, dry leaves slapping the windows. Mariah stood at the parlor window, clutching the curtain, eyes fixed on the dark beyond. Firelight from the hearth lit her face, showing lines of strength weighed down with sorrow. Silas came in, brushing dirt from his shirt. He saw her there, still as a shadow about to slip away. Mariah turned. Her deep blue eyes glistened, yet held resolve. She drew in a breath, steadying her voice. "I must go." Silas froze. "Go where?" "Anywhere but here." She swallowed hard. "I cannot let you lose everything just for sheltering a woman like me. You're only 25. I've already had a husband. I know what bitterness is, what loss feels like, what judgment tastes like. But you've a whole future ahead. Don't waste it on me." Each word cut him like a knife. He stepped closer, his eyes fierce. "Mariah, do you think I care for their words?" His voice struck hard, each word a blow. "If I lose the ranch, at least I still have you. The only thing I fear is letting you walk out that door." Mariah's breath caught. Her lips moved, searching for protest, but no sound came. In that moment, Silas closed the space, his arms wrapping firm around her. She froze, then felt his heat at her neck, the strength of his grip steady as oak. Slowly, the trembling in her chest ebbed away. Not since the day her husband died had she felt such an embrace. Not desire, not pity, but resolve. A vow without words. Face this with me. She shut her eyes and leaned fully against him. That warmth spread through her, melting years of cold exile. "You don't understand," she whispered, voice unsteady. "One day, they'll make you regret choosing me." Silas held her tighter, his voice sure in her ear. "I'll only regret letting you leave tonight." Tears slipped down her cheek, not from weakness, but from the strength of hearing words fierce enough to make her believe. Believe she could stand. Believe happiness was not some far-off gift. In the parlor, fire cracked in the hearth, gold light washing over two figures locked in silence. Outside, the wind carried rumor over rooftops. But within the cabin, the quiet between them stood stronger than the storm. That night, no more words were spoken. No promise, no defense. Only the circle of arms, enough for Mariah to know she was no longer alone, and enough for Silas to know he had chosen rightly, even if the world beyond their walls stood against him. In the parlor, The fire still cracked in the hearth, golden light leaping over the timbered walls, rising and falling with each gust of wind outside. The scent of pine smoke mingled with warmth, folding the small room into silence, leaving only two souls close enough to hear the rhythm of each other's hearts. Silas Keaton held Mariah Ellis in his arms, his chin resting lightly against her damp curls touched by evening dew. The warmth of her body seeped into his, and his unsettled mind strained against calm. Then, as if driven by something greater than himself, he turned her gently, bringing her eyes to meet his. Mariah lifted her gaze. Her dark, travel-weary eyes glimmered now in the firelight, catching his storm-blue stare. The eyes of a young man of 25, both untested and burning. Time seemed to pause. Outside sounds fell into the distance, leaving only their shadows flickering against the wall. Two figures divided by years, joined in a single glow. Silas's hand trembled as he reached for hers. His fingers closed softly, hesitating, as though afraid of being cast aside. But this time, unlike before, Mariah did not pull away. She let him hold on, let the warmth pass between them, though fear still stirred faintly within her. His voice came rough and shaking, yet sure in its aim. Mariah, show me how to love you. The words fell like a blade, cutting through every barrier. They were young, raw, but so true that she froze. For years she had known touches meant only to take, stares meant only to strip dignity. Yet here stood a man, looking at her as though she were his whole world, pleading to be led through a door he had never opened. A faint, sorrowful smile touched her lips. She lifted her hand to his cheek, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "No one has ever spoken to me like that," she whispered, her voice low and unsteady, yet her eyes carried a strange gentleness. Silas bent close, breath warm against her mouth. The first kiss came slow, fragile, as though any sudden move might shatter it. But when lips met lips, both knew a threshold had been crossed. Mariah answered, at first with caution, then with depth. She guided him, her seasoned lips finding the rhythm for his halting ones. Her chest pressed against his, feeling the fierce pounding of his heart. He drew her closer, as if afraid she might vanish. Firelight revealed their faces, painted with yearning and tenderness. Silas trembled as Mariah's touch stirred new sensations, flooding him with a storm he had never known. It was not haste that carried them, but the quiet joining of two lonely souls who had at last found shelter in each other. They gave themselves, slow yet fierce. For Mariah, it was more than yielding flesh. It was opening the locked chambers of her heart. For Silas, it was more than desire. It was learning to place love into every gesture, every breath. With each moment, Mariah felt the youth in him, but she also saw resolve, saw respect no one had ever given her. And Silas, in the midst of wonder, still looked at her as the first and only woman he would ever vow to guard. When their breathing finally eased, they lay quiet in the warmth. Mariah rested her cheek against his chest, eyes closed. He stroked her curls with a steady hand, whispering into the dark, "Tonight, you've taught me more than I ever hoped." Mariah opened her eyes, a softness rare and deep shining there. "It was not me who taught you," she answered low. "It was your own heart that chose this path." Outside, the rain had passed. Only the prairie wind sighed across the wide land. Within the cabin, two figures remained entwined, needing no further word. The fifth night slipped by, but Mariah did not leave as she once vowed. She stayed, not as a wanderer passing through, but as if she belonged now, to the hearth, to the arms of Silas, to the choice they had made in silence. From that night, destiny shifted, not by thunder or force, but by a gentle flame burning steady in the hearts of two souls. Dawn broke after the storm, sunlight spilling gold across the soaked fields. The air carried the scent of wet earth, as if the whole prairie had been washed clean. In the cabin, the fire had burned down to ash, yet the warmth of the night before lingered still. Silas Keaton stirred, opened his eyes, and found the room altered. It was no longer the barren chamber of a lonely man, but a place filled with another's breath, another's scent. He sat up slowly, still overcome by the memory of last night. The night he first learned what it meant both to love and to be loved. The door eased open. Mariah Ellis stepped in, carrying a wooden tray. Steam rose from a tin cup of coffee, beside it a few slices of fresh bread. The morning sun slanted in, catching her face, worn from a sleepless night, yet bright with a quiet tenderness. "You're awake," Mariah said softly, with a shy smile. "I thought you might need something to start the day." Silas reached for the cup, his fingers brushing hers. No longer the awkwardness of days before. Their eyes met, and in that glance lay something new, not host and guest, but husband and wife without need of vow. He drew her hand closer, holding her beside the bed. "Thank you," his voice rough. "Not just for the coffee." Mariah looked down, a flush rising in her cheeks. It had been many years since she had seen a man's eyes shine on her with such respect, such care, and with the unsteady sweetness of youth. Breakfast passed in simple gestures of closeness. Silas laying his hand over hers as she ladled soup, Mariah wiping a stray drop of coffee from the corner of his mouth. They laughed softly at the clumsiness, but in each look, each brush of fingers, the truth of last night settled deeper. They had chosen each other. Yet outside, the prairie wind carried a storm of another kind. Before noon, the sound of hooves echoed up the dirt road to the ranch. Through the window, Silas saw Harlan Graves, wealthy, powerful, and feared across the valley, riding a tall black stallion, two men trailing behind. His cloak whipped in the wind, his eyes sharp with open contempt. Graves dismounted, boots striking the ground like hammers, and strode to the porch. Silas stepped out to meet him, shoulders squared, though he knew well this was a storm not easily turned aside. "Keaton," Graves's voice came deep, each word carved in stone. "I'll speak plain. Keep this ranch, and I'll see it done. I can have the bank look away, the creditors back off, but—" His eyes cut past Silas, to where Mariah had appeared faintly in the doorway. "The price is sending that widow out." The air froze. Mariah clutched her cloak, her chest tight. She had expected as much, but hearing it aloud pierced sharp as a blade. Silas did not answer at once. He looked into Graves's eyes, and in his mind rose the image of his father, the man who had built this ranch with sweat and blood. Then came the memory of last night. Mariah's trembling gaze, her hand against his cheek, the warmth of her body silencing the thunder. He drew a long breath, voice steady as iron. "If you decide who belongs under my roof, then this ranch has no meaning left to me." Graves's brow arched. He let out a thin, mocking laugh. You're young, boy. You don't know the world. One day you'll regret setting love above land, and when you do, don't come seeking my hand again. Silas's gaze did not waver. Maybe so. But if I lose this ranch, I'll still have her. Behind him, Mariah froze, tears blurring her vision. His words struck her heart like a flame rekindled after years of ashes. Graves looked between them, lips curling in a cold smile. Very well. Let's see how long you last. He swung back onto his stallion, the pounding of hooves fading into the horizon, leaving the yard heavy with silence. Silas turned, finding Mariah still standing in the doorway. She trembled, not from fear of Graves, but from the force of the choice just spoken. He stepped close, lifted her chin, his eyes unwavering. I'll hold the ranch. But more than that, I'll hold you. And I'll fight for both. Mariah gave a small nod, her lips unsteady with the shape of a smile. In that small cabin, they clung to each other, drawing strength from the bond itself. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and perilous, but in their hearts, resolve was carved deep, not only to defend the land, but to guard the love newly lit between them. Late autumn wind swept down from the mountains, cold enough to bend the withered grass in the yard. In the small front room of the ranch, Silas sat at the old wooden table, a bank notice stamped red spread before him. The numbers stood sharp and merciless. The debt was overdue, the time for extension nearly gone. His fingers pressed the paper until it crumpled. Sweat clung to his brow, though the fire in the hearth gave only modest heat. It felt like a vice tightening until he could scarcely breathe. Mariah stepped in, flour still dusting her hands. One glance at his face and she understood. Without waiting for words, she sat beside him, her hand brushing the paper. "Give me a little time," she said, her voice low but steady. "I have a few things. Necklace, earrings, keepsakes from my mother. If I sell them, it may help some." Silas looked up, meeting her eyes, honest, yet lined with sorrow. He shook his head hard, the words near bursting. "No, I won't let you sell what's left to you." Mariah started to argue, but he cut her short, voice tight. "Those pieces are your life. I won't let my debt strip you of memory." Silence fell. The fire cracked, its glow shifting across her face. Mariah studied him a long while, then gave a small nod, her eyes glistening. His refusal told her what she already knew. His feeling for her was no fleeting impulse. It was the resolve to protect, even against weight he could barely carry. A few days later, they rode down to town to meet a trader. But this time, the air was changed. Where once had been whispers, now prejudice stood naked. The moment Silas and Mariah stepped into the store, men lounging across the street let out whistles, their laughter sharp as knives. "There he is, young Keaton with his widow. 10 years between them, and different skin besides. No wonder the ranch is failing. Looks like he fancies something more than his father's land." The laughter swelled, spilling down the main street. Mariah dropped her gaze, scarf drawn near to cover her eyes. She quickened her pace, but each word cut deep, stirring every buried wound. Silas walked beside her, jaw locked tight. He heard every word, felt every scornful glance. Then, just as they crossed the threshold, he stopped. In a single motion, he turned, clasped her hand in his, fingers interlaced with a grip too firm to be denied. The street hushed. The jeers faltered. Silas lifted his head, his voice carrying down the row of buildings. "Hear me clear! This is the woman I've chosen, the one who will stand with me, who will help me hold this ranch. Laugh if you like, but I'll not trade her for land or for coin." The air stiffened. Faces once mocking shifted uneasily, whispers replacing laughter. None stepped forward. Mariah stood at his side, his hand burning in hers. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with an emotion she could not hold back. Part wonder, part relief. A boy ran past, then stopped to, stare. Wide-eyed, he lingered, as though he had never seen a man stand so straight against an entire town. That evening, back at the ranch, the sky bruised purple with twilight. In the kitchen, Mariah's hands trembled as she cut a bundle of greens. Silas came in, laid down the parcel of goods, and stepped close. "Do you think I was wrong to speak so?" His voice was quiet, searching. Mariah lifted her head, eyes still damp. She shook it, words catching in her throat. "No, but I fear for you." They won't forget easily. Silas covered her hand with his calloused palm, his gaze steady. "I don't need them to forget. I only need you to stay." Mariah fell silent, letting his grip tighten over hers. Her shoulders trembled, not with fear, but with feeling too deep to hold. Outside, the prairie darkened, fields stretching wide with nothing promised but wind and trial. Yet in the small cabin, two hands clasped, and two hearts found their ground. From that moment, both knew there would be no turning back. The days that followed stretched wide under Wyoming's dry, golden sun, the wind carrying dust in restless gusts. The Keaton Ranch, worn and sagging after months of neglect and rain, began to stir back to life beneath the hands of two souls. Silas Keaton rose at dawn, pulled on his leather gloves, and swung the hammer against each broken fence post. Every strike rang like the beat of a heart set with new resolve. Beside him, Mariah Ellis was no bystander. She gathered hay, spread it on wooden racks to dry, her hands steady with long practice, showing no tremor even as she cut through the bundles with a knife. When the cattle strayed, Silas cracked the whip, guiding them toward the water trough. Mariah stood by the fence, her eyes following the herd, calling out when a calf drifted too far. At times, Silas caught her gaze on him, focused, proud, as though in his frame she saw not only the man, but the shape of their shared future. By midday, the sun blazed, sweat soaking Silas's shirt. He sat on the porch steps, calloused hands sticky with resin. Mariah came from the kitchen with a cloth. Without a word, she bent to wipe the sweat from his brow. A simple act, yet warm enough to make his eyes sting. Another time, when he split timber, a shard flew up and cut a deep line across his arm. Blood welled fast. Mariah hurried, pulling him under the porch roof. Her fingers shook as she bound the wound, trembling more than he did. Silas watched her face tilted close, a loose curl brushing his cheek. His chest tightened, heartbeat quickened. He said nothing, only let her tend him, as though her care was the one grace he had ever needed. By dusk, with hay stacked high and fences standing straight again, the ranch looked changed. No longer a ruin, but a place reborn. Standing in the yard, Silas and Mariah turned their eyes over it all, weariness in their bodies, but light burning in their eyes. The toil was heavy, but it had been shared, and that made it sweet. Night fell. A thin crescent moon hung over the land, silver washing the fields. Inside, Mariah sat at an old mirror, brushing through her thick curls. Each strand caught the lamplight, glowing like a gentle flame. Her hand moved slow, her eyes wandering into the reflection, drawn back to the years of lonely drifting she had endured. The door opened softly. Silas stepped in, his tall frame filling the narrow light. He crossed the room without a word and wrapped his arms around her from behind. The hold was firm, hot with breath and strength, and Mariah froze. His voice, low and rough, sounded against her ear. "No more 5 nights. This is your home, forever." She trembled. The words fell like a vow without a ring, without a witness. Her hand pressed against his arm, fingers clutching lightly. Her eyes shone, her lips quivered, yet her heart felt lighter than it ever had. Silas bowed his head, resting his brow against her hair. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost. The warmth of a home. I won't let it slip away again." Mariah turned to face him. In the lamplight they held each other's gaze, long and unbroken. Then they embraced, breaths mingling, hearts beating in the same rhythm. In that moment, every boundary, of age, of color, of judgment, was swept aside, leaving only 2 souls who had found one another on the vast prairie. Outside, the wind howled across the fields, and the moon drifted behind a haze. But within the wooden house, love was no longer trial or hesitation. It had become a choice, a lasting choice they would defend to the end. Winter drew back, leaving room for spring's soft gold to sweep across the Wyoming prairie. At the Keaton Ranch, no longer did fences lean or water troughs stand dry. New rails ran straight, troughs brimmed with clear water, and sleek-coated cattle bellowed in clusters beneath the sun, proclaiming that life had returned. The hired hands Silas had brought from town now found their rhythm. The yard rang with hammer blows, the lowing of cattle, and the sharp laughter of men at work. Each day calves were tended, numbers grew, and the wide pens began to crowd. A scene that months before had seemed far off now stood solid and real. In the yard, Mariah Ellis bent low, gathering sheaves of hay. Her hands, calloused yet quick, moved without pause. Her curls were bound back, stray locks dancing in the wind. Sunlight caught the sweat trailing down her cheek, making it glint like crystal. She smiled as she worked, a rare, unburdened smile stripped of old weight. The ranch was finding its footing, and within her, so too was a true home. Then came a voice behind her. "Mariah." She turned, ready to answer, and froze. Silas Keaton knelt in the full blaze of afternoon, his eyes fixed steady upon her. In his hand shone a plain gold ring catching the sun. The air seemed to still. Wind and cattle called as before, but now they faded into backdrop for this one moment. "Mariah Ellis," Silas's voice rose deep and clear. "From the day you knocked at my door, asking only for a corner in the barn, my life was changed. You gave me strength to stand again, walked beside me through the darkest days, and turned this place into a home. I don't want to keep you for 5 nights, or 10. I want to keep you for life." Mariah lifted her hand to her mouth, tears breaking sudden. She had not expected, on such a golden afternoon, among the noise of work, that he would choose this moment, bare, unpolished, yet truer than any other, to ask for her hand. Around them, the hired hands stilled. For a heartbeat they were silent, then eyes shone bright. A few women smiled through their tears, and when Mariah gave a trembling nod, the whole yard broke into cheers and clapping. She wept openly, covering her face. Silas came forward, took her hand, and slid the ring onto her shaking finger. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with feeling, "for walking with me through the hardest days. Now let me walk with you through every day to come." Mariah could not find words. She only pulled him into her arms, her tears spilling into a smile. They held each other close amid applause, joyful cries, and the prairie wind itself seemed to sing in triumph. They stood there, witnessed not by priest or paper, but by sky and earth, by men and women whose sweat had joined theirs. And that was enough. Love forged through trial, sealed in toil and tears, needed no other binding. From that day on, the Keaton Ranch was more than a place restored in work and land. It was bound in a vow everlasting. For Silas, the ranch was no longer a burden of inheritance. It was a home where he loved and was loved. For Mariah, it was no longer a passing refuge. It was where she belonged, always. Their wedding was no grand affair, no heavy tables spread with food, no whiskey flowing as in the richer families of town. Silas Keaton and Mariah Ellis chose a soft summer morning on the prairie to bind their lives. The sky was clear, the wind gentle, golden light spilling across the wide fields, as if the very earth stood still to witness the union. Those gathered were faces worn but dear, people who had walked beside them in hardship. The gray-haired smith whose calloused hands had once fixed the corral gate in a stormy night. The old couple who had worked the ranch since Silas's father's time. A few of Mariah's scarce friends, souls who knew well the harshness she had endured, and even the ragged children she had shared bread with during lean days. There was no white gown, no veil of silk, only a simple cotton dress Mariah had sewn herself from old fabric, tied with a pale ribbon. Silas wore a new shirt, collar stiff, trousers of worn brown canvas but clean. They stood before the cabin porch, beneath the shade of the old cottonwood tree, hand in hand, eyes fixed upon one another as though the rest of the world had ceased to matter. An older man, a longtime friend of Silas's father, spoke softly as they gave their vows. "Son, your father would be proud. And you, Mariah, today you need drift no longer." The prairie wind carried the blessings away, mingling with plain, honest applause. No trumpets, no diamond ring. Yet in such simplicity lay a sacredness no lavish wedding could match. Months later, the Keaton Ranch stood wholly changed. No more broken fences or empty barns or weeds choking the yard. The herd had doubled, their calls echoing across dawn and dusk. The stables rose straight and solid, the porch roof patched so rain no longer seeped through. Out in the fields, new furrows smelled of life and promise, whispering of harvest to come. Silas spent long hours in the open. Shoulders once burdened only with his own weight now carried the ranch and the family it sheltered. He plowed, sowed seed, drew water to the rows, checked each stretch of fence. Every swing of the hoe, every step pressed into the soil, declared he had grown into the man of this land. Mariah, too, found her place. She claimed a corner of the porch as a small schoolhouse. Each morning, black children and those of mixed blood, barred from the town's school, came laughing up the ranch road. Mariah laid planks across sawhorses for tables, opened an old Bible and a handful of borrowed books, and with patience taught them letters and numbers. "Miss Mariah, how do you read this one?" a brown-skinned boy asked, soil still on his hands as he pointed to the page. "That's the letter A, child," she said with a smile. "Like when you open your mouth to laugh." The children giggled, their voices ringing brighter than the prairie wind. Each time Silas saw them gathered, pride swelled in his chest. Their ranch would never match Harlan Graves's wealth, but here was abundance of a truer kind, of life and fairness. One evening, with the day's labor done, Silas returned. His shirt clung with sweat, hands caked with dirt, yet his step was light. He paused on the threshold, watching Mariah seated among the children. Sunset fell over her shoulders, her curls loose, her smile radiant against the glowing sky. In that moment, Silas knew she was not only the wife he loved, but the living heart of the Keaton Ranch. The woman once cast out, once scorned, now sowed words and hope into the lives of forgotten children. When the lessons ended and the children left, Mariah gathered her books. Silas came near, laying his rough but warm hand on her shoulder. His voice, low and hoarse after a long day, brushed her ear. "See, Mariah? We've begun again. No riches, no gold, but the ranch breathes anew." She looked up, her dark eyes glowing with peace she had never known. "And I have a true family at last," she said, her voice breaking. They held each other beneath the reddening sky, breath mingling with prairie wind. Trials lay behind them. The ranch was no longer a burden of inheritance, but a beginning. Home, school, and soil where hope could take root for those to follow. That night, when the ranch lay quiet, Silas sat on the porch beneath a sky crowded with stars. Mariah brought him a cup of hot tea, set it before him, and sat down at his side. They did not need many words. Their hands entwined, their silence spoke plain. The storms had passed, and a new life had opened before them. Summer came, and the prairie stretched in a sweep of tender green. The Keaton Ranch rang louder than ever, cattle lowing from the far fields, children's voices rising in their lessons on the porch. The steady thud of hammers as Silas and the hired hands raised a new barn. Life moved slow but certain, not rich but full, as though the land had been reborn along with the hearts who lived upon it. In the small kitchen, Mariah Ellis sat mending her husband's shirt. Morning light fell through the window, catching the silver now woven into her curls. Her face, weathered by years of hardship, glowed with a brightness she had never known. She had lived long enough to taste loss, to feel the scorn of the world. But here, in this plain room, she knew she had a family, yet something she had never dared imagine began to stir. For days she felt the changes, morning sickness that left her faint, sudden weariness in the middle of teaching, and then the delay that made her heart tremble. She told herself it was only toil wearing her down. But the truth could not be denied. She was with child. Mariah sat long in silence, hand trembling against her belly. Part of her could not believe it. At her age, after years of wandering and widowhood, she had thought her body closed to such a gift. And yet now, life stirred within, a miracle she had never dared to pray for. That evening, Silas came in from the fields, shirt damp with sweat, hands streaked with earth. He pulled off his gloves and found Mariah waiting on the porch, tears shining in her eyes, though her smile trembled. "Silas," she called, her voice half laughter, half sob. He hurried to her, alarm in his face. "Mariah, what is it?" She took his calloused hand and pressed it to her belly. His heart stopped short. He looked into her eyes, saw the faint nod, the shimmer of light within them. "We are going to have a child." The air seemed to freeze, then broke open. Silas stumbled back a step, stunned, then burst into laughter through tears. He swept her up, spinning her across the yard. hay scattering underfoot. Dear Lord, Mariah, a true angel. The ranch hands, hearing the shouts, ran out. When the news spread, cheer rolled across the yard. Children clapped, women laughed. The ranch that had already come alive now throbbed with wonder. From that day, Silas worked harder still. He built more pens, plowed more land, stacked hay high, as if laying a fortress for the life yet unborn. At night, when Mariah wearied, he sat beside her, his broad hand resting gently on her belly, his eyes filled with reverence, as though guarding the rarest treasure of his life. Mariah, too, was changed. Fear lingered, but she felt as though she had been given breath anew. From a woman who thought she would never again be a mother, she now carried the seed of love within her. On quiet nights, lying close to Silas, she whispered, "I thought I had lost everything, Silas, but it seems God has left me one." Miracle, he kissed her curls and answered softly, "Not a miracle, Mariah. The fruit of happiness. Ours." Months later, the Keaton Ranch witnessed what it never had before. On a cool, bright morning, mingled with the bawl of cattle and the chatter of children, came the first cry of a newborn. Silas, face glowing and eyes wet, carried the tiny child to the porch. Morning light bathed her fragile skin as he choked out, "Our daughter, Mariah." Our angel inside. Mariah lay exhausted but smiling, tears streaming as she watched from the window. For years she had thought her life ended in widowhood and wandering, but here, in this cabin on the prairie, she had a husband, a child, a home. From that day, the ranch felt changed again. Neighbors who once sneered could not deny the strength now flowing there. The hired hands adored the infant girl, stopping to cradle her whenever they passed. Mariah often sat on the porch, cradling her daughter, her soft humming carried with the wind. Silas would stand apart, watching them, his chest swelling with gratitude. For everything he had lost was returned to him, reshaped in beauty. And Mariah, who once believed her life was nothing but drifting steps, now held the whole world in her arms. She knew this child was more than their daughter. She was proof that love could outlast prejudice, outlast time, outlast even the deepest scars of the past. Beyond, the prairie winds still swept wide and endless. But within the wooden house, under the porch where children learned their letters, beside the clear cry of their baby girl, Silas Keaton and Mariah Ellis had found it all. Dear friends, perhaps each of us longs for a home like this. Not perfect, but strong enough in love to lean upon. If this story has stirred a memory or an old dream, share it in the comments below. And do not forget to like and subscribe to stay with us as we continue to tell these Wild West love stories, tales from the frontier, for hearts that still believe happiness can bloom even after the longest winter.